Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/vm. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and tunein.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/vmspod or paypal.me/vmspod to make a one-time or recurring donation and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. I'm kicking off the week with a early morning trip to D.C., as in out the door at 5 a.m. to get the Acela from Newark, so I figured I'd get this episode up early while the rest of you are watching the Super Bowl or Puppy Bowl or whatever it is you're doing on a Sunday night. This week's guest is Otto Penzler, publisher, bookseller, and until recently, the owner of the world's largest collection of crime fiction, or mystery novels, or however you want to characterize them. And he's also the author of the new book, Mysterious Obsession, Memoirs of a Compulsive Collector. Now, according to the great spreadsheet that knows all, it was 2015 when the book reviewer Michael Dirda first suggested I record with Otto. I kind of let it slide, and then my work pal Cornell would bring him up every so often. Cornell's a heavy-duty collector of crime fiction, among a couple of other categories of books, which is how we really bonded, even though we initially connected through work-related stuff. I made one oddball literary reference. He jumped on that, and we discovered we have a lot to talk about outside of pharmaceutical outsourcing. Anyway, he has bought from and sold to Otto for many years through his Mysterious Bookshop, Otto's Mysterious Bookshop. Now, with the publication of Mysterious Obsession, Cornell gave me another nudge, and despite my fear of coming off like a moron about crime fiction, I bought a limited edition first printing of the memoir and hit up Otto about recording. Now, Mysterious Obsession is a wonderful book. Otto opens up about not just the greatest books in his collection, and every chapter in the memoir is about a specific book, but the stories of how he managed to acquire them and the passion of book collecting, the conviviality and fraternity among collectors, and the thrill of the unexpected find. Plenty of colorful details from Otto's career as he built up his collection and his various publishing houses and his bookshop. These are all areas, as you can imagine, that I find absolutely fascinating. Now, on top of that, the occasion for writing the book was Otto's decision in 2018 to auction off his collection of 60,000 or so volumes. And you guys know how interested I am in the intersection of monomania and mortality. So this one was right up my alley. And the other great part of this episode is that it gave me occasion to visit the Mysterious Bookshop on Warren Street in New York City. I'd known about it for years, but I'm never that far downtown, or if I am, it's after hours, so it was wonderful to get to go to the store. It's a great space, ton of wonderful books. They host some neat signings and events. You should sign up for their newsletter via the website and find out more about what's going on at the bookshop and how to support it. And you should definitely hit the store when you're in New York and order yourself a copy of Mysterious Obsession, the second printing, via mysteriousbookshop.com. It's a slim book, like 170 pages or so, but so good, so entertaining. I can't recommend it highly enough. As caveats go, not a lot. I should keep in mind, I have not told you a whole ton about Otto. That's because so much of it is going to come out in the course of this conversation. You'll get everything and why this is such a great combination and why this is such a fun conversation for me. Anyway, caveats, not a ton. Phone rings in the office every so often, but you don't hear the whole answering machine business or anything like that. Now here's Otto's bio from the flap copy of Mysterious Obsession. Otto Penzler is the founder of the publishing companies Mysterious Press, Otto Penzler Books, The Armchair Detective Library, Penzler Publishers, MysteriousPress.com, and Scarlet. He opened New York's Mysterious Bookshop in 1979. He has written or edited more than 60 books, winning the Mystery Writers of America Edgar Awards for the Encyclopedia of Mystery and Detection and The Lineup. His library of nearly 60,000 first editions of mystery fiction went to auction in late 2018. His new book is Mysterious Obsession, Memoirs of a Compulsive Collector. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Otto Penzler. Well, actually, it brings me to the general question of how your field has changed. And your field encompasses a number of different fields, as it turns out, with publishing, editing, retailing, book collecting, etc. I guess there's the question of how it's changed, but the first thing, I guess, is how you define yourself and what you do.
Well, first of all, I do pretty much and have done pretty much everything in the mystery world. Mm-hmm. I co-wrote an encyclopedia that was published in 1976, won the Edgar in 77. I started a publishing company in 1975 called the Mysterious Press. So I've been a publisher and an editor. For a 3-year period, I was a literary agent with the person who is now my agent, called the Mysterious Literary Agency, the Mysterious Press. Mm-hmm. And then a few years later, I opened the Mysterious Bookshop.
Keeping a trend.
Came up with one word and was exhausted. My creativity was finished. I've written on the subject relentlessly. I've been an anthologist. I have more than 60 anthologies that have been published. So there really isn't anything in this field that I haven't done with the exception of actually writing a mystery. So I've been a parasite in the mystery world the whole time, using the creativity of others to have a career.
And now you've found out my secret. That's all I do. I just open up a question and let other people do the expanding.
And rattle on as I do, yeah.
But what led to? Well, we'll get back to the question of what's changed over time. But what led to the memoir as a document of your library, and then the decision to start auctioning off the library?
Well, they're really connected. I had decided that I was going to live forever.
Of course,
that was my plan. And then one day I woke up and I thought, maybe God doesn't have the same plan. And I'm 77, and I have no family. And so this collection that I put together over a 55-year period, in all humility, is I would argue the greatest collection of crime fiction ever assembled. Mm-hmm. It's better than the Library of Congress because it also has great British books, and it's better than the British Museum because it has great American books, as well as documents, manuscripts, inscribed books, etc. So once I made the decision to, I couldn't die and have all those books, that great collection, sitting on the shelves with nobody to shepherd it to whatever its destiny was going to be. And so I decided to put it up for auction. So what I did was invited my whole staff, because most of my staff are bibliophiles. They really love books. Yeah. They really care. So I invited them all up to my house, cooked lunch, and then we did a tour of the library where I pulled books off the shelves and showed them really great books that they could never see anywhere else. And at the end of the day, after having pulled the books off, shown them the books, told them stories about the books, Charles, who runs most of my publishing companies, said, I have an idea. Why don't I come back next week? I will photograph these great books. You pull off a bunch of books. I'll photograph them, and then you write the little anecdotes that you've been telling us all day. And I'm no fan of writing. Yeah. Writing is hard. I'd rather do yard work than write. It's just hard, you know. But I liked the idea, and I thought this would be good. And it was the least onerous writing I've ever done, because I was really telling stories about great booksellers who were very influential in my collecting life, colleagues, and good friends from an era where we were collecting together. We were competitive with each other, but we were great friends and certainly helped each other in many ways. And so there were reminiscences as well as telling stories about books. It was also telling stories about people who had a major influence in my life, both as a collector and as somebody who appreciated the physicality of a book, not just its contents, but the actual item itself.
Mm-hmm. And was it you telling the stories, or did you actually write first draft? I just wasn't sure the way you were describing it. Did you sit down and tell him anecdotes and then edit afterwards?
No, I didn't tell it to anybody.
Okay, so it was writing. Because I wonder, because it's such a conversational style you have in the book. It's just so, it feels so natural. Well,
thank you. I think thank you.
No, I mean in a great way. It's one of those where it's not esoteric. The voice itself is consistent throughout the piece. It's really wonderful.
I will say I've had 2 compliments on the book. The same 2 compliments from numerous people. One is that it was too short.
Oh, yeah.
Which
I would have loved another 200 pages of it, but yeah.
That, to me, is a great compliment. Always leave them wanting more. It means that they weren't bored. And the other is that, God, Otto, it sounds just like you. And I don't know any other way to write.
That I used to get also with my editorials when I used to run a trade magazine. It's just like talking to you, people would say. But the fact that it was all my verbiage and not theirs made me think, do I just dominate every conversation, don't let anybody else talk? Is that what they mean? But eventually I learned to take it as a compliment. So, yeah.
I do. And I don't know how else to write. I suppose I could be stiffer and, a little more academic, a little more scholarly. And I have been from time to time. But when I'm writing without overly thinking my audience, I'm often asked to write for various magazines. And occasionally I'll become a little more pedantic.
But that's, again, depending on, that's the specific audience for that
venue. Yeah. Precisely. But if I'm just writing the way I want to write, I used to write a column for the New York Sun. Which is a New York newspaper. This
wasn't the reconstituted one from like the 90s or early aughts?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that one. You're just another example of why that newspaper was basically, if I was having this insomniac thing where I was creating something and was completely unaware of it that was intended solely for me, it would be the New York Sun. Because I would open issue after issue at the office, and it was like, they're writing all these things for me. I don't understand who else the audience is for this, but
it was it had the best art section.
Yeah, the art stuff was phenomenal.
A lot of the news section was
neoconservative, but
it was conservative, but so am I.
Yeah.
So I had no problem with that. But it was thin because it didn't have the kind of budget that the Washington Post or the New York Times has. But the art section was spectacular, and they hired me, I don't know, maybe 2 months after it started, 6 weeks after it started, and I was there till it folded more than 5 years later. But anyway, the point of that is that I had to write 1,000 words. My column was 1,000 words every week, and I would go home. I live half the week in New York and half the week at my house in the country, where it's quiet. So I can edit, I can read, I can write in the country, which I never can do here in New York. And so I would go up on Thursday night, and this column was hanging over my head. I said, "Oh my God, I have to write this column," and I would do anything to put it off, and I would do yard work, and I would anything. And then Sunday came around. I knew I had to deliver it on Monday morning. I said, "Okay, I've got to sit down." I wrote, and I struggled, and I edited, and I cut, and I rewrote, and it was just torture. And it'd take 4, 5, 6 hours to write 1,000 words.
Yeah. On a subject that you adore.
Yeah.
It's not like this is something that's, outside your field.
And a subject I know.
Yeah.
And they let me write about anything I wanted to. It wasn't necessarily only book reviews. I could review movies or a television series or gossip. I mean, just interesting stuff about the mystery world. Quizzes. I would write quizzes.
Yeah.
You know, just anything that was fun. They were happy with it, and I dreaded it every single day. And then one day they asked me to write a separate piece during the week, a feature article, which I did. I never say no when people ask me to write for money. I'm a fan of Samuel Johnson, who famously said, "Only a fool writes, but for money." Right. And I got a phone call, and it was from a very smart reader who said, "Otto, so I was reading The Sun, and I was reading this feature, and I said, this guy writes just like Otto." And then I checked the byline, and it was you. But I'll tell you, Gil, this was a really key moment. It was the first time in my life that I realized I have a style. I never knew I had a style. I just wrote, you know? And then I realized I had a style. From that time on, I would sit down and write the column, 2 hours at tops. It came easily. It flowed. Mm-hmm. It's because I now had confidence in my writing.
Once you knew
After
your voice.
writing for 50 years, I suddenly had confidence in my writing.
Yeah. There's a side question I wanted to ask about the memoir, which is that it's the memoirs of a compulsive collector.
Yeah.
Is there any other kind?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Yes, I have a lot of collectors who are customers in my store, and they're casual.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I really like these books, but I said, well, you know, I have this esoteric piece by the same writer that you've been collecting. It's a pamphlet, or it's unknown, but it's very rare or something. No, I just really want the major books, and I don't need manuscripts. I don't need inscribed copies. I just want a signed copy. You know, I don't want advanced galley, none of that. I just want the books. So no, not all collectors are compulsive.
Okay. I wasn't sure if collector, by its very definition.
No. Very few people are really compulsive.
Yeah. I pretend I'm not. I like to think I'm not. I buy books, but I only have a few titles that I've gone a little crazy about, you know, in terms of getting old editions,
Sure.
you know, making sure it's you know, my great realization, I was at the Antiquarian Book Fair a few years ago and came across Orwell's collection of essays, Inside the Whale, which he inscribed to Anthony Pohl, two of my favorite writers. And I thought, I'm not that guy, because conceivably I could have put the money together for that. I walked away. I thought, you know, new car, more important than you know, spending.
You've just proven my point.
Yeah.
I would have taken a bank loan. Well, there's a story, one of the stories in my memoir is I took a bank loan to buy books because I didn't have any money. And then I had to go back and buy 2 more. And I didn't have enough my credit rating wasn't good enough to increase the bank loan.
Right.
So I had to borrow money from my brother, who was unemployed at the time. So that's compulsive.
Yes. And that was my moment of, yeah, I know, but I just, you know, I can't do it for, I think it was either like 18 or 25,000 or so. And I was just thinking, you know, I treated every day as though I would be fired throughout my professional career. So I just put away money all the time, compulsively. But yeah, that was the instant of, no, I'm just not quite there. For me, it's more, there are certain books with guests, for example, Clive James, who died 2 weeks ago, inscribed a review copy of his poetry collection when we recorded in 2015. And I told my wife, she's like, why is it in this one particular place in the house? I'm like, that's my escape route if the house is on fire. It's one of the few things. It's a backup hard drive of all the podcast episodes. That book, because it's irreplaceable. Pretty much everything else can go up, or everything else is you know, backed up on the cloud. But that was pretty much my very few things that I need to make sure are saved. But I assume you got way beyond that point in your own life that. Well, there is no one indispensable. Although, is there one book you would want accompanying you into the next world, or at least in the casket? Oh,
I don't know. That's now we're going from collecting to reading. and they're
Yeah.
very different.
Okay.
People have often said, in their abject ignorance, like, "Oh, have you read every book in your library?" Well, my collection was almost 60,000 volumes. And I said, just do the math. If I read a book every day of my life, it would come to 365 books times 70. That's 2,700 books or 28, whatever the arithmetic is. I said, I haven't come close to reading all of them, and I wouldn't want to. Some of these books are absolutely awful. They're unreadable. It's not about reading, Look, for a sane collector, and there are some, then you collect what you love, which I think is what I teach people, or I try to teach people all the time. They say, well, what should I collect, Well, what's going to go up in value? So if I knew what was going to go up in value, I would have bought Apple stock 20 years ago.
And I came up in comic books. So, I understand the whole, you have to buy this because it's going to be worth X, down the line.
You never know, and you can't predict. And collect what you love.
Right.
Well, I love mystery fiction, so I collected all of it, or I tried to. I came way short, but
you beat everybody else.
Yeah, I had more books, but not just in quantity. I made sure I had the best copy available as much as I could.
Those are some of the stories that fascinated me. I already had X, but when this version of X came up, I realized I had to have this, and I could get rid of the earlier one.
And I was very fortunate because I had a bookshop. So most collectors, they buy a copy. It's kind of a shelf holder. They know it's not really good enough, or they think it's good enough, and then they see a beautiful inscribed copy with a perfect jacket, whereas they had a beat-up jacket. And then what do you do with that duplicate? You sell it generally to a bookseller who is buying it at wholesale so that he can sell it at retail. So it's going to be hard to get your money back, the money that you put into that copy in the first place. I had a bookshop, so I would upgrade certain books 4, 5, 6, 7 times as they got better and better, even though they were uncommon books. And I was able to then sell very good books in my store because I had a better one. And it's the amount of time it takes to do that, to go and check your library and check the copy.
And pre-computer. A lot of this is pre-computer era.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So you're looking over... Oh, I'm assuming, like me, you have a mental map of where everything is. Well, for the most part.
But now I do because I have nothing.
Yeah.
All the books
That's just a lot easier nowadays. But as you were coming up, with me, everything is spatially related to my library downstairs. It's only about 2,000 books, but, I know where things are based on, how it felt when I was shelving them initially, because there's not a direct organizational quality to
well,
some of it.
It was pretty easy for me once I mastered the entire alphabet, because I put the books in alphabetical order by the author's name.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, there were 3 alphabets.
Yeah.
On the main floor of the library were the great books, the 19th century, the pre-World War II books, the great writers, Chandler and Hammett and Kane and all of that. On the second floor, on the balcony level, were the really good modern books. Modern books were certainly significant and interesting, but they're not as interesting as old books. Bibliographically, they're simpler. Right. Back in the 19th century, they would stop the presses halfway through to make corrections, for example. So there were early and late states of the same book, even though they're both first editions. One is a first state, second state, third state, whatever. With modern books, that's much less common. They mostly have one print run for the jacket, and that's largely it. Of course, in time, publishers frequently would change the price of the jacket 2 years down the road or whatever, and make it more expensive if they still had the books and were selling the books. So you'd have first state jacket and second state jacket, or first issue jacket and second issue jacket. But in general, they're less interesting bibliographically. And then in the basement level, my basement fortunately has windows. The back of the house is built into a hill.
The same as my house.
Yeah. So there was still light. those were just books that were part of the collection that I had to have because I was essentially trying to collect all of it, and they're not particularly interesting and not particularly valuable.
Mm-hmm. So it's not like I met a guy in Rhode Island, Don DeMassa, who's a science fiction collector who built a separate building on his yard, basically, to house everything. But it's also coming from the mass market paperbacks and, history of science fiction dating back decade upon decade upon decade. You're managed to keep everything in your own house and still have room to sleep.
When I built the house,
yeah.
My then wife, and I were looking for a house to house the collection as well as us, mm-hmm. and we found a beautiful, beautiful old stone house that had 9 bedrooms, and we thought, okay, and we don't have kids, so it was just the 2 of us. I said, this is going to be it. And then we started looking at it, and every one of these little bedrooms had a closet, it had a window, it had a door. There was very little wall space.
Right.
Yeah. And we said, that's not going to do it, even though it was 9 bedrooms, which sounds enormous. So we built this house, and it was a big house.
When you started, yeah.
No, it was built. It was built to hold the books. Mm-hmm. My architect friend and I did the arithmetic. Mm-hmm. How many square feet would we need to hold X number of books? And that's the way the library was built. So you get on the outside, you look at the house, say, whoa, look at the size of that house. Then you get into the house itself. It's a normal house. Modest-sized rooms, yeah. Very livable. And then you open the library, and it's like a cathedral. So yeah. It's a big library with a little house connected to it.
And at what point did you end up overloading?
Never did.
Really?
No. Wow. It would have held roughly 70,000 books, and I only got to 60,000. So I was the envy of every book collector who ever lived because I had extra shelf space. Yeah.
Book carts were my fallback after I installed bookshelves into the walls and finally had something other than those IKEA, Leaning Tower of Pisa shelves. And then within about 2 months after finally, redoing the entire downstairs into a library, it turned into stacks just piling up on the floor. I'm like, okay, book carts, that's the next step. But,
one thing I would tell anybody who's starting to build a library, don't buy bookcases. Mm-hmm. Build floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Yeah. Because the bookshelves, there was wasted space on top.
Right.
Blank walls where you could put, pictures. Yeah, but no books.
Yeah, you got to put books everywhere.
Floor to ceiling. Yeah, floor to ceiling.
Even the decorative area in the middle that's part of the structural shelves holding up the house. Well, I could start using that space too. I don't need to put these, photos my wife has and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
and then
put them in another room.
Yeah,
not in the library.
Honey, they should be in the bedroom, right? Let's just put those there. Yeah, it's a life overcome by books is I think a good one. But
yeah, and what you're describing is what most collectors face. They think they have enough room, and they don't, because books are like gas. They expand to fill the amount of space available to hold them.
Yeah. Which is why I'm glad. The one reason I'm glad your book wasn't an extra 200 pages. At least it's a nice and slim.
It's a slim volume.
But what is it like not having the collection around?
It is so depressing.
Yeah,
I can't even talk about it. It is. It was one of the worst things that I've ever done in my life. It is.
But one that you regret or not?
I regretted it the second I said, yes, I'm going to sell them. Mm-hmm. And I've never stopped regretting it. I know I had to do it. It was an adult, grown-up decision. But that doesn't mean it's any less
painful.
Sad. Painful, yeah.
My science fiction writer friend of mine, Samuel Delaney, moved from the city down to Pennsylvania, and in the process had to give up about 3/4 of the library he'd built up. Now, he's writing all the time, and he described it as being lobotomized, the fact that he just doesn't have the books he wants to grab at any moment's notice to refer to something.
And I find it every day, because I use, in addition to liking having them, that acquisitive sense, I use them all the time, connected to various parts of my job. One of the things that I do, one of the publishing companies that I have here is something called American Mystery Classics, where I'm reissuing the great golden age American mystery crime novels. And Charles, who is the publisher, said, we need some quotes for this author. I said, oh, I'll just go check, because the dust jackets of a long run of books by this author will have quotes. They always have reviews and nice quotes on the jacket. And I suddenly realized, no, I can't do that anymore. I did that for a few months, and then the books went. I said, oh, I'll just check. Oh no, wait a minute. I don't have those books anymore. So there's little reminders. It's not crucial, but they're just little reminders that I can't do it. And I also I edit a lot of anthologies. I will say, when I normally say, no, they're all gone. The books are all gone. It's not true.
I assume you have a core that you have left over, but...
Well, it's not so much left over as a deliberate decision.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
To keep my reference books and to keep the anthologies, because I go to those to find stories that have not been reprinted in 50 years or 100 years. So I use those, and I kept one little collection, I have to say.
Yeah.
I started out by collecting Sherlock Holmes, and it became overwhelming, and I decided I couldn't collect both Sherlock Holmes and mystery fiction, because there are about at least 30,000 books, pamphlets, magazine appearances, etc., involving Sherlock Holmes. So I sold most of that collection. But Arthur Conan Doyle's brother-in-law, E.W. Hornung, created Raffles, the gentleman jewel thief, the amateur cracksman. And when Conan Doyle apparently killed Sherlock Holmes, Raffles became the most popular character in detective fiction for a very short time. He didn't write all that much. And I became fascinated by this gentleman who steals. And I started collecting Raffles, and I have a great Raffles collection.
Yeah.
And I kept that.
Right. You have at least one thing to
Yeah. And I can't add to it because I have almost everything. At least I haven't been able to find anything in years that I could add to it. But I keep looking. It gives me something to hunt for.
Yeah, well, that's, as a former comics guy, the internet, while it creates a world of plenty, I think you mentioned it in the book, it's not as much fun when you can find everything wherever when you need either that or you find out it doesn't exist. But the fact that you can just hit a couple of keys and find the thing you've been looking for a couple of years, as opposed to going out and hunting and
and that great moment of discovery, the serendipity of walking into a store where you don't expect much, and there, among all the dross, is that beautiful golden treasure. You can't experience that by going online. Yeah. To me, there's a comics aspect of that. It was the same thing. If there's either a back issue or a collection or something you were trying to find, I'll stop in this comic store in this weird town I've never been to, but I'll just go hunting around in the back bin, and there's the thing I've been looking for the last 15 years. I'd rather do it this way than, type something in on Amazon and get something shipped. Yeah. But and don't use that language in my...
I know. At the moment it was coming out of my mouth, I thought he's going to hit me for saying that word. But yeah, hunting something down, it means something. It has a little more freight to it, I guess. Which is, again, the fun of going to the antiquarian book fairs, at least seeing the things that I would never plunk down $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for, but seeing... in fact, the last time I was there, I did bring up one... if they had X, I would actually drop serious money on it. Every publisher, every seller I mentioned to, I've never even heard of that. I don't think that exists. I'm like, good. I'm glad this isn't even a option for me to decide, well, yeah, let me throw down tons of money for this one thing, which again would have to take this special position in my house so that I could grab it on the way out if I needed to. But as a question I have, when you mentioned Raffles, it occurred to me, what have you learned, I guess, about literary reputation, about the things that were the second most popular thing in the world 100-something years ago that are largely forgotten now? What is the whole process? Have you reflected on?
I do. I think about that a lot because there are so many writers who had fabulous reputations and sometimes deserved.
Yeah.
And they're totally forgotten now. And I don't know exactly what it is that keeps some names or some books desirable today or highly regarded today, as opposed to others that have been totally forgotten. And I don't really have an answer to it. Sometimes it's a movie. If a movie was made from a book, that book becomes a lot sexier because it's got a good book.
Yeah.
But almost nobody would collect Jeffrey Holmes, for example, whose real name was Daniel Mainwaring. But Jeffrey Holmes wrote some very, very good novels, but nobody would know him today.
Yeah.
Except one of those was made into a movie called Out of the Past, maybe the greatest noir film ever made. And as a result, Jeffrey Holmes and Build My Gallows High, which is the book on which Out of the Past was based, is 10 times more valuable than his other books, which are no more or less common.
Right.
So I don't have answers to all of it. I mean, that's in the collecting world. In the literary world, the same pertains. You know, there are certain writers that, hard-boiled writers, Howard Brown. Very few people remember who Howard Brown is, but he was perhaps the closest to emulating Raymond Chandler in style when he was writing in the 40s and 50s. He was that good. Nobody knows him. Why?
Yeah. And again, the vagaries of literary reputation. This first came up for me a couple of years ago. I recorded with a guy who accompanies silent movies. He plays piano or organ to silent films, which he's made a career out of. And over the course of the conversation, he would start tossing these names in occasionally because he helps the Smithsonian identify film clips that they only have bits and pieces of and don't know what it's from. And he'll mention that this guy was the second biggest comedian in the world behind Fatty Arbuckle, and 100 years, or less than 100 years later, no one knows who these people are. And it always struck me as that sense of transitoriness, or the accidents of fate, I guess.
Also, nowadays, a lot of people don't know who Fatty Arbuckle is.
Yeah, I know. I'm dating myself there, too. But, I always know him from the Scandal at a minimum. But that sense that, just certain writers, and I guess that falls into the publishing side of your world, that, you want to bring attention to great works that have just managed to fall through the cracks, I guess, of history.
Yeah, I mean, in that particular series, American Mystery Classics, I am bringing back some books that nobody remembers. I'm also publishing the major writers of that time, like Ellery Queen and John Dixon Carr, and Mary Roberts Reinhardt, who was the best-selling writer in America for almost 15 years. Not the biggest name in the world anymore, but she was an incredibly successful writer. Only Sinclair Lewis outsold her for about more than a decade. So, but I'm bringing her back, and then I'm also bringing back books like The Widening Stain by W. Bolingbroke Johnson, who I know you've never heard of.
No, never.
And neither has any of your listeners. But it's a terrific bibliomystery, which is a particular interest of mine, which I particularly love. Mysteries with a book background, whether it's set in a bookshop or a library or collector or that sort of thing. I love those books.
Yeah, did a lifetime of focusing on mystery novels, which tend to be centered around murder, help with the sense of mortality at all when it came to your own life? Again, you mentioned wanting to be immortal, but
Yeah, it was always my plan. For many years, I was the happiest person in the world. And my theory about good health is that you eat everything that you want, drink as much as you want, and behave badly as much as you're able. But if you're happy, you'll live forever. And I was happy, so...
oldest guest I've had, 90-something years old. I think he was running on pure rage for about 50 years, and he's managed to keep going with that. So it varies. It might be genetic, but I think either extreme of emotion works. But when I ask about reputation, what role does reputation play in your world in terms of the collector side? Keeping a good reputation or developing a bad one? Do those impact the collecting?
Do you mean my reputation or the author's?
Yours? No, yeah, the collectors' reputations as opposed to the authors. Is there a community in that sense of, oh, Jesus, don't deal with this guy? He's not necessarily you, but, other people in the space.
There are a few...
unscrupulous, whatever.
Well, that might be strong.
Okay.
Let's say they're not fanatic about pointing out the flaws of a book as they're selling it. And if you go on Abe Books, which is a rare book site where used books are sold, I always know when somebody is selling me a collection of books that they didn't work with some of the really great booksellers in this community, in this world. I know that they bought their books from either the wrong bookseller or they bought all their books online because they're not uniform in terms of quality of the condition of the book and accuracy of description. It is not uncommon for me to buy a collection of, say, Rex Stout, where the customer selling me the books, customer is the wrong word, will say, oh, I have a complete collection of first editions. And then I get the books and I see that half of them are book club editions with the little corner clipped off on the dust jacket where it says book club and it's clipped. And they have the same design. They look very much like first editions. They're easy to tell if you know what you're doing, but a lot of people don't because they trust the people who's selling them books, eBay or A-Books and that sort of thing, where nobody's reputation is really on the line. I've been here for over 40 years. If I sold the wrong books to people, word would be out.
Right.
There are other booksellers in the same position who have developed a great sense of integrity and honor, ethics, and those are the people that collectors should be dealing with, but they don't know. They don't know, and they don't ask. They think that they're getting what they think they're getting. They expect that if you're reading and it says it's a fine copy in a dust jacket, and they get it, and the jacket is worn, torn, price clipped, all the book club label inside the book. They haven't done their research. They haven't read reference books telling them what to collect and how to collect and what to look for. And they're taking shortcuts. It's an era in which attention spans are not what they used to be. People are in a rush to do most things, and collecting is not something you should be doing in a rush.
Yeah.
And they're very disappointing, and they're disappointed when I say, look, I don't even want the books, or whatever price you had in mind, that's not going to cut it because they're wrong. These books are all wrong. The condition is look at the water stains. Didn't anybody tell you condition matters? It's like real estate. The three most important things are location, location, location. With collecting, assuming level of scarcity or rarity, the three most important things are condition, condition, condition. And I try to teach people that the way booksellers took the time to teach me that when I was starting out.
Yeah, how long was that process for you?
I was a fast learner about it because I really trusted these booksellers.
Yeah.
So I understood that within the first 4 or 5 years of collecting. Fully understood the difference between a good copy, a very good copy, and a fine copy. Yeah. And it was hammered into me by a couple of other collectors and by the good booksellers who I trusted. Booksellers who had been doing this for 25, 30, 40, 50 years of experience.
Well, and again, it reminds me the fact that we're in a bookstore here. Throughout the memoir, you've got the stories of Booksellers Row. A lot of these people maybe living in an area would know, as I do. I mean, I'm in northern New Jersey. The closest bookstore, there's a couple of Barnes and Nobles, but otherwise Montclair Book Center's maybe 40 minutes away. And it's, if you're not around that environment and can't sit down with people
it makes it harder.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't have the ability, because of whatever your job is, of traveling. Yeah. Of going around to other cities. For years, I'm going to say for 40 years, I traveled quite a bit. And whenever I went into a town, the first thing I did, checked into my hotel room, got the yellow pages out.
It's the same thing. Yeah. For me, it was comic stores, but and bookstores.
There you go.
Those are the first two.
And I would call. I would sit in the hotel room, and I'd call in bigger cities. I would call 20 bookshops, 25. Mm-hmm. In smaller cities, 5 or whatever the number was. And I'd say, do you sell first editions? Do you have mysteries in, that's mixed in with fiction? Okay. Do you have a big fiction section? Yeah, we have, okay.
I'll be out there.
And I would go and I would find books. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't have that ability to just travel and do that. And of course, yellow pages are
long gone.
A thing of the past. And so they do the next best thing that they think is the next best thing, and they go on eBay or Abe Books and hunt that way, and it's all wrong.
And it also, not just that the internet in general drives prices down. People tend to look for, wow, this one's incredibly cheap. I'll grab that one. They're always,
Exactly.
Searching for the lowest that they think they're going to get away with.
Yeah, and they think they're being slick. Yeah. Oh, here's a copy for $100. Here's a copy for $20. Oh, that guy charging $100 is a thief. I'll get the $20 copy, and the $20 copy is worthless.
Yeah,
it's junk. So, but it sounds so self-serving as a bookseller to try to teach people that or try to explain that.
You're just trying to hustle me, but in fact,
exactly.
Yeah. Was that the biggest shift with the internet in terms of? Not just revealing that people will always try and get the cheapest thing possible, but the discovering the lack of scarcity of certain things. Like with trading cards, I think with baseball cards, that was one of the realizations that you may be the only guy in your town who had this card, but there are about 4,000 other people, in a 10-mile or 20-mile radius who have it and, are selling it.
Well, there's no question that books that I knew were scarce, not rare. The word rare is overused.
Yeah.
But scarce. Like, oh, wow. I'm a specialty dealer, so I get a lot of books. I look at a lot of books. A lot of people sell me books. They bring books in to look at. I travel. I'm hunting for books all the time. And I said, wow, I haven't seen one of these in 5 years or 10 years. And then you suddenly look on the internet and there's 12 copies. One's in London, one's in Idaho. They could be anywhere because anybody with 2 books with a duplicate can go on Abe and try to sell their books, or on eBay and try to sell their books. So that was certainly a change. But another change is really the number of collectors has dramatically diminished over time. Collecting rare books is not an activity in which most younger people are particularly interested.
Sure.
They'd rather play video games. They'd rather text their friends. They would rather do other things than spend the time to collect books. There are some. I have some very young customers who seem really interested and seem really smart. And, they don't have a lot of money, but...
Neither did you when you were starting.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
But I also had the good fortune of having Booksellers Row, 60-something bookshops selling books in a few block area.
Yeah. Yeah, Frederick Tutton talked about it in his memoir in the 50s and early 60s, so that was his paradise too.
Sure. It was absolute heaven. You could go into store after store. Just like next door, there was another used bookstore. And next to that, there was another used bookstore. And so you could find a lot of books. Well, there are very few good used bookstores anymore.
Yeah.
They've been driven out of business by the internet. And you talk about one of the changes. Well, one of those changes is that all those used bookshops are gone. They don't exist anymore in bigger cities, especially New York and San Francisco, rents are so high that it's very difficult for a used bookstore to stay in business.
Right.
Very difficult for any bookstore, including new bookstores, to stay in business because the overhead is astronomical between taxes and insurance and real estate and salaries, staff salaries. Very, very hard to stay in business. Whereas in the past, you could find used bookstores everywhere.
Yeah.
There were no town.
Oh, I went out to Columbus a few years ago, and again, same thing. I online just looked up bookstores, and they had a couple of these Book Barn, just used places, and I thought, I got a rental car. I've got a couple hours. I will go find something in every one of these places just to patronize, guys who are willing to do this. So, now we talk about eBay and everything else. In the memoir, you do have an anecdote about an auction gone wrong, where you found yourself drawn into a book that you did not think you were really that interested in, but you started bidding up higher and higher. That sort of thing occur much in your career? I didn't think this book was worth that much, or I wouldn't have spent this much, but the competitive...
No, actually, I think you have the story wrong, if I'm remembering.
Is it the Archer Daw one?
Archer Daw.
Yeah.
I was very interested in it.
Okay, that's right.
The dealer bidding against me, I thought, why in the world would you want this book?
That's right. And
he wouldn't stop bidding, and I really wanted this book. Mm-hmm. It is still, I eventually, I lost it. I finally quit because it got silly.
Yeah.
It was just insane. And when it was over, I said, why in the world would you want that book? He said, because I've never seen another one. I said, so what? You sell modern literature. This is a turn of the 19th century short story collection that is so obscure. You're never going to sell that book. Why would you do it? He said, because I wanted it. Yeah. I wanted it. I said, I understand.
Yeah.
That's
I can't fault you on this.
I can't. And a year later, he called me and said, do you still want that book? And he sold it to me for almost what he paid for it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he hadn't juiced it up because I knew he was never going to sell it.
Right.
I did buy it. I put it in my own collection, although it was pretty expensive. And to this day, it's still the only copy I've ever seen. No other copy has ever shown up, which is baffling because it was by a very popular writer. J.S. Fletcher, okay, not a popular name anymore, but Woodrow Wilson, when he was the president of the United States, picked a J.S. Fletcher book as his favorite book of all time. So it became a famous book, The Middle Temple Murders. And why that book is so incredibly rare defies comprehension.
Yeah. But have there been instances where you've been drawn into bidding on something you weren't necessarily hot for, that you just said, let me just keep chasing this a little? But
I will say that
is there an auction fever, I guess?
There is an auction fever.
Yeah.
And it's less true today, where most people seem to bid online or on the telephone rather than being in the auction room.
Yeah.
But for a fairly substantial portion of my time as a bookseller, more than as a collector, as a bookseller, if there was a good collection of mystery fiction and I went to that auction, those books were mine.
Yeah.
I was totally arrogant about it, and I wasn't going to let people outbid me unless it got stupid. And there were times where it was stupid, and I did it anyway because I wasn't going to let somebody beat me on a book.
Yeah.
This is the mysterious bookshop.
Right.
Okay.
I got a reputation to uphold.
Exactly. Yeah. Talk about arrogant.
Developing a poker face for this sort of thing?
No.
Yeah.
So many booksellers go into the auction room and they stand in the back and they bid with just
surreptitiously,
raising a pencil or winking or whatever it is. I got in the front row. I had my paddle. I raised it high. I wanted everybody to know I was bidding on that book, and don't bid against me because I'm going to bid it either so high that I'm going to get it, or you're going to overpay.
Yeah. Are there strategic moves like that in the auction where you kind of lure somebody else high so you can get something else they want? Not that I want you to give away all your secrets or anything, but
No. I don't think I've ever
done
that or considered that.
Yeah. And all the buying and selling with books, any of that carry over to other aspects of your life, like buying a car or anything like that? Do they show any benefit whatsoever, or is it just so incredibly focused on the unique aspects of book buying?
No, I'm not much of a shopper. I don't buy hardly anything except books. Yeah. I hate haggling.
Right.
I won't do it. I don't do it in my store. People will come in. It's pretty common for a lot of booksellers to offer discounts immediately. And I try to keep the price because we're so central, being in New York City, and it's a pretty big store for a specialty store. And so I have a lot of books. A lot of books come and go fairly quickly. It's a little more like a supermarket in some ways, because it's pretty substantial for one category. So I try to keep the prices low enough that the books will turn over on a regular basis, because I can't put a whopping price on a book hoping that someday it will sell. I have to keep selling books to cover all the overhead.
Yeah.
So I keep the prices low. So when people come in and say, "Can you do better?" I said, "No, I'm sorry. The price is the price." Or they'll buy like 15 books, and they'll say, "If I buy all of these, what can you do for me?" I said,
"Give you a bag.
I'll add them up." And it sounds pompous, but it's not. I'm not. I can't compete on prices. Either you want the book or you don't. The books are priced fairly. Yeah. That's it.
I do have to say, I was Amor Towles, the guy who wrote A Gentleman in Moscow a year or two ago.
One of the great books of the decade.
Yeah, I enjoy the hell. When it was sent to me by a publicist, I misunderstood and thought it was a standard mystery book, and just didn't spend time. I didn't sit down and read it. A year or two after I finally started, I'm like, oh my God, this was, again, written for me. I don't understand, how he was reading all my thoughts when he put this together. We sat down and did a show, and he mentioned that his reading group this year did all of Le Carré's Smiley novels. And let me give those a shot. I read The Spy Who Came In From the Cold 20 years ago, but I never tried the other ones. I'm on the last one now. About 2 months later, I've just gone through this insane binge of knocking them all out. But I was reading a Penguin Canada version of The Secret Pilgrim last week, riddled with so many typos. I ended up going through the Barnes & Noble website trying to find a store that actually carried it. Just even though I'd already finished the book, I thought, let me just get a better American version without the typos. Even though I may never go back to this book again, I want this horrible version out of my house.
I understand, yeah.
Yeah. So I got here and, of course, started looking up and thought, I should have waited. I could have picked up the copy here. I'll end up grabbing something before I leave the store, of course. But, what did retailing teach you over the years, both about collecting and, about the genre, about dealing with people? Was it something you ever thought you were?
Was I in the process of learning while I was also trying to teach? I did learn that one of the shibboleths of retailing is the customer is always right, is not true. Some customers are idiots, and some are just plain rude, and I throw them out of my store. Yeah. I don't work on the floor hardly at all anymore. I deal directly with my customers. Like I said, I don't really work on the floor. I work mainly as a publisher, but I work with the rare books here, so I have long-standing customers, or sometimes new customers who are interested in learning, interested in hearing about the books and so on. And I like working with those. But in my old store, when we were on 56th Street years ago, I was on the floor all the time because I had a very tiny staff and so on. So I found myself getting less and less patient after about 15 years of doing it, and people would suddenly start being really rude. I would throw them out of the store. And finally, somebody on my staff said, "I think you've been on the floor long enough. Why don't you go in the back and let me work at the front desk?" So this doesn't speak well of me. I have to admit I was impatient.
You had different strengths.
But I was great with customers who are polite, right, who are interested. I'm patient and I'm I'm really good with them. I like these people. I really like my customers. Seriously, I love book people. I love bibliophiles. I love people who read books. I love people who write books. I love people who collect books, unless they're rude. So that taught me that I needed to be more patient. Taught me that there are a lot of really smart people in this world. I really, I always thought, for many years of my life, I always thought I was the smartest guy in the room. Being exposed to more people, no, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. There are a lot of people.
It's always a good lesson to learn.
It's a good lesson to learn. It taught me some humility, which was certainly needed. I can't think of anything else that is easy to articulate.
Yeah, it's more the evolving process and what you learn about yourself more than about other people.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the newbies, the younger people interested in collecting, what sort of stuff are they generally?
It's a wide range. For years I always thought I could predict my customers. So young men would come into the store and say, "Oh, these guys are buying hard-boiled fiction. They're going to buy Raymond Chandler and Hammett or the new private eye writers or so on." Elderly ladies. They're going to buy Agatha Christie,
Dorothy Sayers.
That's not true.
Yeah.
I had a very good customer for quite a long time, and he and his wife would come into the store. They deliberately stayed in the hotel next to my store on 56th Street, and that couple was Stephen King and his wife.
Yeah.
Steve loved British crime writers. P.D. James, Ruth Rendell, they were his favorites. His wife was buying the toughest, hard-boiled noir fiction.
Well, I guess if you're going to live with Stephen King, you have to have a certain degree of tolerance for.
It's really not as predictable as you would think. But I think most of the younger people who are collecting younger writers, newer writers, writers who are writing now. There are more people collecting Michael Connelly and Lee Child than a 19th century writer, for example. Whereas older customers, people in their 50s or up, probably have a wider range about what they collect. They'll collect modern writers as well as 19th century or pre-World War II writers.
Yeah, pal of mine said some of the tech bro money seems to go towards Ian Fleming books. For some reason, that's their status symbol in a sense, is having these things. But.
Totally. By far more than any other writer. Young guys, young men, with money, because you need money now. The Ian Fleming books are not rare. No. I can find anybody 5 copies of any first edition by Ian Fleming in 2 days. But they're expensive. Yeah. Because it's a fundamental law of capitalism, supply and demand. Yeah.
If we start pumping money into it,
there's a large supply, but there's an even greater demand. And look, those are really interesting books. Those are good books. They deserve to be collected.
Yeah. But they're just not this is not the scarcity aspect of, Archer Daw or something like that.
Exactly.
Farthest you've traveled for the sake of a book?
Say again?
The farthest you've traveled for the sake of a book?
Oh, you did read the memoir. I flew to Glasgow, Scotland for a single book. Literally, I had a letter from a gentleman who said, I have a book I'd like to sell, and it's a copy of The Curious Mr. Tarrant. Now, none of your listeners have ever heard of C. Daly King and The Curious Mr. Tarrant, but it is a notorious rarity. Published by Collins, which is a major. They published Agatha Christie in England, a major publisher, and this book shows up once every 20 years, if that. Would you be interested? I said, I would be interested. What would you like for it? He said, well, actually, I don't want to just sell it through the mail. I like to deal face to face. And I didn't have a lot of money in those days. So I said, I'm sorry, are you suggesting that I fly to Glasgow to buy your book? He said, well, if you want it. And I said, and I really had to think about it. So I did. I bought a ticket. It wasn't hugely expensive, fortunately. And he said, "You come and stay with me. We'll cook you a great dinner." I met his wife and his beautiful daughter, had a lovely dinner. And then we got down to it, and he said, "I'm not really sure I want to sell it." I said, "Excuse me? I mean, you wrote to me and said that you wanted to sell this book." He said, "I know, but I really like this book, and now I'm having some second thoughts. Let me sleep on it. And I have a few other books that I'd like to show you." So I go to bed, and I'm thinking, I can't believe I've done this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever done. This guy is suddenly, what did he want, company? I don't know.
Yeah.
And I had a hard night trying to fall asleep, thinking I had just wasted something like $400 on a plane ticket, and then a taxi to get to his house, and all of it. It was horrible. Charming dinner. It was lovely. They were lovely people. And we wake up in the morning, and he shows it to me, and he said, "This is what I would like for it," which was very little. And I said, "Okay." He said, "But you have to, in order to buy that, you have to buy these other books." And it was like 30 or 35 other books. And he said, "And if you buy them all, I'll throw in a suitcase for you to take them home."
Yeah.
And I bought them all. I have no memory of what any of the other books were like. And I got my copy of The Curious Mr. Tarrant. To this day, the only copy I ever had a chance to buy. Mm-hmm. I've seen two other copies in other places, but I've never had a chance to buy another one. Mm-hmm. And that was 40 years ago. No, 45 years ago.
Yeah. And I flew to London to Cambridge to record one of these for a 48-hour trip and turned around, but that is pretty much comparable. So that's I'm glad we have about the same distance. Neither of us have gone to like Asia for the sake of one.
It's crazy.
But you would, you know.
It was worth it.
Yeah.
You know, I look back and it's a story, you know.
Then and again, to me, that's every book tells a story, not just the story itself. You know, the fact that you've got all those anecdotes and so much that goes into the collection. It made Mysterious Obsession a real joy to read. So,
thank you.
But I was asking one of my past guests, Levi Stahl, works at University of Chicago.
I know him very well.
Good. Did the Donald Westlake nonfiction collection, which was a joy to read.
And is responsible for all the Richard Stark books being published by Chicago.
Right. He asked about the editing process for the anthologies. For, you know, what goes into it in terms of, and you go a little bit within the memoir talking about which editions you were starting from for these things. But can you talk a little about the?
Sure. I've edited, as I said, more than 60 anthologies, right. But there are two kinds. One is, and I haven't done one of these for a long time. I don't know if I will again. I doubt it. I commission original stories. Mm-hmm. And then I have to edit the story. And when you commission a story from a major writer, which most of my books featured people like Elmore Leonard and Michael Connolly and I
would say James Ellroy, but I realize that might be opening a whole can of worms.
James Ellroy.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And so then I have to, and you never know what you're going to get. And the story could be really awful.
Yeah.
And then what do? You've asked somebody to write a story. You've offered them money, given them a deadline. And major writers are always busy. They're always busy.
Yeah.
In addition to writing their books, they're touring for their publishers. They're being given awards. They're being given honorarium
the honorary degrees. Yeah.
They're doing charity events. They're doing a million things all the time. So when a major writer takes the time to write a short story for you, that's an honor, and it's a joy most of the time. But sometimes some of the stories needed to be edited. They needed serious editing, and it's awkward to say, well, thank you for your story, but it has a lot of plot holes, and you really need to fix it. And fortunately, they're professionals, and they have always taken it in good stride. Not true of Ruth Rendell, But
I didn't know if you were going to name names, but go on.
It's really rude to mention names like Ruth Rendell, who is such an odious human being. So that was one kind, and then the other kind is where they're previously published, and there are two major anthologies that I've been doing for the last 15 years or more. One is Best American Mystery Stories of the Year, which I've been doing for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt for 22 years. I have a wonderful, wonderful editor who does the preliminary reading. She's the fastest reader in the world and has great taste, Michelle Slung. She's worked for me for more than 35 years. Wonderful editor, and drives me insane because she can read such a staggering amount of stuff so quickly and then remembers. Yeah. And has the good taste to send me the right story. So I only have to read like a couple of hundred stories out of the 3,000 or 4,000 that she looks at. So that editing process is then from those I try to find the 50 best stories, and best, of course, is a word that has a lot of
Otto's best.
Yeah, my favorites really is what it comes down to, rather than best. And then send those off to the guest editor, who picks the 20 that he or she likes best, and those are the Best American Mystery Stories. Or I do these huge anthologies for Random House, for Vintage, called The Big Book of Something. And I read 400, maybe 500 stories to find the 60, 70, 80 best or favorite on a particular subject. And those are very time consuming. I'm a slow reader, unlike Michelle, who's a fast reader. And they come together, and they are, in all humility, they're great anthologies. They're really great. They all get starred reviews in Publishers Weekly. They get wonderful reviews in the consumer press and so on. And I'm very proud of them. It takes a lot of time, but having done it and seeing it on the shelf, I'm very proud of having done them.
When did you feel that you could edit, knowing that you, as you said, you're not a writer, as you put it? When did you feel confident in your ability to both to edit the pre-published or the existing published material, and also to work with writers like the ones you mentioned?
It was.
Or do you ever feel qualified to do that?
I still sometimes think, who are you? To
imposter syndrome's a great thing. It'll go, as you've proved now, it goes into your 70s. That's tremendous.
Yeah. It started early out of necessity, because I'd started the Mysterious Press. And in those days, I was mainly, in the very early years, I was mainly collecting short stories by major writers. Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, Ross MacDonald. I published The Complete Lou Archer, Cornell Woolrich, and a few other things. So that's how I started. And then I got an original novel by the great Stanley Ellen. I think arguably one of the half dozen best short story writers of the 20th century. Jonathan Lethem agrees with me, by the way. And he wrote about it extensively in his introduction to Best American Mystery Stories of the Year. He was the guest editor this year. And most of his introduction was devoted to Stanley Ellen. And he and I had become very good friends. I collected his complete short stories. And then he had a novel, and we were talking, and he said, Random House turned it down. It was very controversial. And his regular publisher turned it down. And I said, could I read it? And he said, yes. And his editor had tried like 12 other publishers. And I said, I'll publish it if you'd let me. And I did, and I read it, and I had a couple of things that I thought needed clarification. But it was as a reader saying, I'm not sure I fully understand what you're saying here. And that became, that's how you edit.
Yeah. It's you start honing that eye.
Are you being clear? Is this, but if the time, not for this book, but for other books, is the time lapse correct? Is the chronology correct? And then you say, would that character really say that? Or you have 6 characters saying the same thing. Like they would say, so I'm like hungry, so I'm like angry. And I said, okay, if one of your characters has that
affectation, whatever,
twitch or whatever it is, you can't have 6 of them do that. This isn't landing the space shuttle. I'm a reader. I don't get that. So, but it was always intimidating. And this is a really good story. Usually I wouldn't say that. I'll tell a story and then you determine whether it's a good story.
But I'm going to trust you on this one.
But I think this is a good story. I had a woman in my store who was, I think, I would argue right now is the best writer in America who hasn't won the Nobel Prize, Joyce Carol Oates. Mm-hmm. And Joyce and I got to chatting, and we became friendly. And at one point, I said something about, I would love to publish you at Mysterious Press. And she said, let me think about it. And one day in the mail, this is so Joyce, there was the manuscript. And it said, I hope you like it. I read it, and it was awful.
Yeah.
This is Joyce Carol Oates. Awful. I don't have the guts to call her and say, this isn't working. Mm-hmm. 5 weeks go by. Normally, when I get a book that I publish, the first weekend that I have that manuscript, I work on the manuscript. I edit it that weekend. So my writers are used to hearing from me no longer than 7 days. 5 weeks went by. The agent calls, said, Otto, did you get Joyce's book? I said, yes, I did. He said, well, did you read it? I said, yes. He said, but we haven't heard from you. And I said, how does Joyce take editing?
Yeah.
And he said, editing? You better talk to Joyce. Now I'm absolutely petrified. Yeah. I am so nervous about this. Only my launderer can tell you how nervous I was. Yeah. Another week goes by. I'm still gutless. Another week goes by. I get a phone call. It says, hi, Otto, it's Joyce. Hi, Joyce. Have you read my book? Yes. What do you think? Moment of truth. I said, I'm sorry, Joyce, it just doesn't work. She said, really? Oh, first there was silence. I think it lasted about 3 hours. It might have been 5 seconds, but it felt like ever.
Relativity. Yeah.
And she said, really? Well, what do you think is wrong? And I told her. And there was silence. And she said, you're absolutely right. What else? And that meant, by the way, it meant she had to rewrite the whole book. Mm-hmm. It wasn't
some minor fix that would,
And then what else? And I told her, and it had to do with the primary character, which meant not only did she have to restructure the book, she had to restructure the character, the major character. And she said, of course, once the first part is true, certainly that's true. What else? I said, I'll just send you notes. This is enough. And she said, thank you so much. And ever since then, if I could do that, and she turned in within, 3 months of rewriting, she turned in a wonderful book. And I've never had that situation with her again. Mostly I just read her books now.
Yeah.
There's so little to edit because she's such a great, great writer. But ever since then, having done that, I know I can edit anybody now.
Yeah.
If I can edit Joyce Carol Oates, I can edit anybody.
Awesome.
So
I'll leave you because I've already kept you past the hour we were talking about, but I did want to ask, was there a white whale for you in terms of the one thing you really wish you'd found?
In my collecting or my publishing?
Collecting.
There were several, and I mostly got them. I had the one bad experience of my favorite novel, which is The Woman in White.
Wilkie Collins. Yeah.
Wilkie Collins. I bought the best copy in the world, possibly, certainly the best copy I ever saw of The Woman in White, the British first edition, the 3-decker, in just beautiful condition. And I had to sell it. I couldn't afford to keep it. So my white whale was trying to replace that over time, and I never could. I never came close.
I was going to say, now you have time and room on your shelves. I'm just kidding.
Dagger in the heart.
Sorry, man. Otto, thanks so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure, Gil. Thank you.
And that was Otto Penzler. His new book is Mysterious Obsession, Memoirs of a Compulsive Collector, from Mysterious Bookshop. It's a wonderful book. It's something I'm so happy that I got nudged into this by my pal Cornell. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It's not available through a lot of book channels. You can't find it through that dirty word that I mentioned during the conversation. You need to visit mysteriousbookshop.com to order a copy of the second printing. Meanwhile, I will keep my signed and numbered first edition right by that path that I have out of the house in case of disaster. Thank you very much. You can find out a lot more about Otto's work at mysteriousbookshop.com and mysteriouspress.com. Those are both all one word. The bookshop is on Twitter as The Mysterious. Otto's publishing house is on Twitter as Penzler Pub, PENZLERPUB, and that has a web home at penzlerpublishers.com. The Mysterious Press is on Twitter as eMysteries, all one word, and on the web at mysteriouspress.com. Oh, and the bookshop is also on Instagram as The Mysterious Bookshop, which you should definitely follow because you'll get to see great pictures of the stacks, the shelves of books, the events, and the whole space. That also has a link to the shop's weekly email, which is a great resource. You got to sign up for that. And all of this stuff is going to be in the show notes page. There'll be links to everything so you can find it all. Now, after we wrapped, I asked Otto, so, who you're reading? And I know that is a problematic question for somebody who is editing all these anthologies, working on all these books, collecting so much stuff. But still, he did have some good answers. So if you want to hear his answer to that and get some extra conversation, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. I will get the fourth quarter 2019 episode up soon, I promise. Till then, you can check out the third quarter episode, which features an hour of book recommendations and fun conversation with Carl Stevens, Emily Nussbaum, Kate Maruyama, Laniers, Christopher Brown, Caleb Crane, David Shields, Dawn Raffle, Simon Doonan, Simon Critchley, Sylvia Nickerson, and Amor Tolles, who Otto and I both appreciate the hell out of. You can support the Virtual Memories show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my secret project, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this episode at Otto's office in the basement of the Mysterious Bookshop in Manhattan as part of a 2-podcast day. That means $12 at the GW, another 30 or so for parking, a few $2.75 subway trips, and lots of coffee. Now, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, and coffee, or just toss me some money because you think this show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Special thanks go out to Nick Bartosik, Buzz Carter, Michael Hacker, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Annie Koyama, Jonathan Kranz, Kevin Katila, Jack Lescamella, Stephen Nadler, Edie Nadelhaft, Barbara Nessim, Jim Ottaviani, George Pfau, Payne Prophet, Dmitry Samarov, David Small, Stephen Solomon, Greg Tanner, Ford Thomas, Armando Veve, and Garrett Zecker for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories show. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.